small group, so I just ask that you guys keep your microphones muted unless you're asking a question. Please raise your hands as you do so. We'll just go ahead and call on you. And then I'll share a Google Doc in the chat in a second that has our upcoming information about our upcoming webinars, as well as our recorded webinars from the past where we kind of go through a foundational series in FHIR. And I am now going to turn it over to Jose, who is our FHIR expert. He has been working in FHIR technologies and contributing to the standards for over a decade now. So Jose, over to you.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Yeah, let's start the open session. We just as a recap, we have been discussing in our kind of FHIR trainings, not really trainings, but welcome sessions. What was FHIR, how does it work, and how can we make it work for it? So we just covered the basics of FHIR, enabling you to just continue search for information, joining the community, and to establish this broader community of FHIR users, FHIR adopters. Also, we have been, a few weeks ago, we were looking at FHIR profiling. That is what we mostly use as FHIR implementers. And so for today, I don't know how would we want to start this. If someone has any ideas to start discussions, to kickstart discussion around those topics, or pretty much any other topic that we might want to discuss. So I'm open for suggestions, for discussions. And I would like to encourage you to just mention the ideas that you have, the things, the gaps that you've seen, anything that you might want to discuss with us. This is a smaller group of a bigger community, but we are here, so we might as well make good use of our time just to focus on things that might be really more specifically interesting to you. Does anyone have any suggestions to start with? So let me ask the participants. We have 7 people, 6. I'm one of them twice, I think. The things that we discussed, they were more about profiling. So they started to be FHIR, and it's about profiling. Next, we'll be discussing terminologies, and then FHIR implementation guides, or setting up implementation guides and servers. All those things will be ending up in a point that we can do our own profiles, we can do our own things. Is anyone doing that right now? Anyone deploying FHIR solutions? Anyone profiling FHIR at this moment? How are we doing it? Anyone want to speak up?
Yeah, Savel here. So personally, I am not, but I worked with a project before, and I wouldn't say I'm at that confidence level saying I can execute something from beginning to end. So hoping to learn more from the others.
That's not a bad idea. How about we do quick introductions since this is such a small group and what you're interested in learning about. I'll start. I'm Rinda. I am a program officer at Digital Square, and I help pull these webinars together. And I'm actually interested, I'm going to steal a question from Sabello, who had a great idea yesterday or earlier in the week about how FHIR can get integrated into existing projects. So I'd love to hear how to think about, how the first initial steps in doing that. Stephen, how about you?
Rhonda, you nominated someone to speak next?
I did. I'm going to call on Stephen if he's feeling comfortable.
No, sorry, I'm comfortable. I just thought I was, I'm driving. So, but my name is Stephen from. That's all right. I stopped. I parked. My name is Stephen from IntelliSoft. I'm actually just here to learn. I've been joining a couple of your meetings and webinars. So I'm really more interested in learning. I'm a newbie in FHIR, and so it's that's really my interest, just to learn. I don't have any specific topics for today. Thank you.
I might as well go next. I'm Jose. I'm working with FHIR for some time, as Rhonda said, and I'm also here to learn because the wealth of the community is the problem, the type of problem that we have to solve. There's no fixed formula for everything. There is no predefined learnings. It's just that what kind of problems are we facing in reality? So I'm interested in sharing maybe some of my pains, but mostly listening to what your pains would be. For example, the starting pain that Sovelo is not yet experiencing, I think, maybe is starting, but yeah, this is the kind of things that it's good to know where you stand. I don't know who else would be willing to introduce themselves.
You're on mute, Sophie. Can't hear you.
Yeah, we cannot hear you, Sophie.
No. All right, how about we give Sophie a second to figure that out. Asaitu, I think I said that name extremely incorrectly, but you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Okay, maybe not. Mark, welcome. We are doing quick introductions, just saying what yep, Mark is gone. Okay. Well, in that case.
Then we continue.
Then we continue.
So yeah, let me pick a bit on the starting on FHIR, because both of you, so both Stephen and Sovelo, you mentioned that you are starting with FHIR. First of all, the hesitation of that you both mentioned, like we don't know yet enough about FHIR. That's a path. It's not going to be something that at some point you say, oh, I'm comfortable. I'm still not comfortable with so many things about FHIR. It's just that as we do more and more experimentation, as we do more and more contributions, and as we do more and more mistakes, we get a bit of sense of what tends to work and what tends not to work. In terms of FHIR adoption, maybe some sentences just to start, spinning some topics. And I would really appreciate if you just jump in and react to some keywords based on what you think of from what I start. I'm just doing this to unblock the discussion. So if you're starting with FHIR, the most commonly or most possibly you will have something, some project, something that you have to do, something that you want to do. So whether it's a mission that you have to accomplish, or it's something that you want to learn by yourself, and you will start with a concrete problem. Okay, for example, let's say we want to put prescription on FHIR, or we want to put the declaration of the death certificate or birth certificates. We want to put those on FHIR. Whatever is the scope. It pretty much follows the normal analytical part. So we're talking about requirements. You're talking about the whole software development lifecycle. At some point, there's a few things to keep in mind, and this is what's most fresh on my head. I don't know if it's more relevant to you. Is that FHIR is just an interfacing language. It's not a storage language. It's something that you do to exchange content with different parties. So your system doesn't have to be FHIR, your system has to talk FHIR. And this is something that's always good to keep in the back of our heads, because sometimes you will see, well, how can I make my database in FHIR format? Well, you don't. You can, but you don't. What's the best database for FHIR formats? Well, there is no perfect database. FHIR is just the language, so whatever your content is in, you can always hopefully extract FHIR content from it. So that's one of the things. Then as you go more into this, you have the problems of, or the challenges of saying, which interfaces do I put here? How do I make those interfaces? So it depends on where you are. If you're in the implementer side, like the server implementation, or the standardization designer, so, or maybe both. you will start feeling different types of problems. So if you're a server designer, you have to look at the tools, you have to see how it works, you have to learn a bit more of the details of how the FHIR syntax is defined and how the whole, for example, the search mechanism, it is quite rich, so it takes a lot of energy to just to have it mastered. And if you're doing the platform, you have to consider these things. You have to see, you have to, for example, enable searches, and you have to also consider all sorts of things like the privacy rules around this, the authentication rules around this. You have to do some types of problems. If you're on the interface definition side or interface design side, then your problems are more likely going to be expressed in a language. I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous session. It really helps to say A says this to B. And if you start thinking of these things, like you start looking at the standardization process and say, I want to send this message. This message is a doctor that has just made a prescription. He wants to send this out. Out to whom? Well, maybe it's a central database of the ministry. Maybe it's a commercial system that holds that information, or maybe just one pharmacy. But then when you start asking these questions, then you pretty much fall into the V model again. So you have your requirements, like who is doing what, or who is saying what to whom. And then we detail that language. And FHIR is pretty much, so when we profile FHIR, is the process is pretty much the same thing. It's a matter of saying, okay, if I want to say, here's the prescription, do I expect this to mean please dispense it, or this is a prescription, do with it whatever you want? Because those might be different things. Here's a prescription for your information is different from here's a prescription, please dispense it, I'm expecting this now. So you might have these nuances, these differences in your flows, and it's always good to analyze them and to discuss them with the stakeholders. And then the process is rather simple. Maybe I can share one trick that I don't know if I shared before. When you do this, you start with defining, okay, prescription has to have a patient, and for the patient you have to have the national patient ID. That's, maybe you say this is mandatory. In my implementation, this will be mandatory. Or I'm in a private company, so the patient's ID, as it's known in our software, that has to be mandatory. Maybe you don't really care about the national number because the patient has an ID in your system, and if you know that that's sufficient, then that's sufficient. So you start doing that analysis. For the prescription, of course, you want to say which meds are prescribed. Is it one, is it many? And what's the posology? So it's 3 times a day, 1 time a day. And you start analyzing this and you say, well, how can I express 3 times a day? Do I do it by text? Well, that's one option. Do I do it in a coded format so that you have these pharmacists, they have this sequence of letters that if you have TID is 3 times a day, BID is 2 times a day, AC is before meals. So you can do these things in codes. That's, I think, a bit better than free text. But then your path is going to be pretty much, how is this, or what information is this? How is this transcoded into a technical format? Is it coded? Is it not coded? If it's coded, what codes do I use? Are there standard codes for this? It's very important to see if I have something that I want to be coded, do I make my own codes, or are there already codes existing out there for this? And then once you have this, you have pretty much most of your profile ready. The rest is a bit more of enterprise architecture to say which interfaces work with what. Let me just give an example of the prescriptions. Sometimes you might say that the prescriptions for oncology have different rules for approval than the prescription, or the prescriptions for narcotics have different approval rules than the prescriptions for normal medication. Okay, but if the content is the same, then you might want to have some additional checks. Maybe you want to have an additional flag in the prescription that says, is this approved, yes or no? And then you send that prescription to the approver approves it, sets the flag, and then the prescription goes with the flag. And so if the pharmacy can read the prescription, and if the flag is active, then it can dispense. So these are some of the workflow considerations that you have. I don't know if this relates at all to any of the paths that you, or to any of the problems that you have been expecting or experiencing. So I would like to have some feedback, if possible, from the people that are starting. Does this resonate? Does this sound problem that you have seen or expect?
Yeah, I think I think those are things I have experienced. And one of my questions today was like a walkthrough through a project from like the beginning to the end that Vrunda just mentioned, just so hoping I can like understand better from there and like where the different pieces of FHIR fit in a software product.
I think I can show you something then. There is one. So if you say where do the FHIR all these FHIR bits, where do they fit into that? There's so much that it's quite a lot of possible fits. The one thing that I'm just thinking whether it would apply, and I don't know if I have it here or if I have it online. I'll just look it up online. So let me just see what other people have done. In this case, it's not really someone that I don't know at all, but let me just share. So at some point, the work that we do is just look up what the others are doing, and see what we can do with this. So let me just look up something very quickly, and then I'll share my screen. Or actually, I can just share my screen now, because I'm just going to look at something that we had. I think I presented something like this before. So where does FHIR fit? So if you're talking about the functional modules, so if you're talking about, yeah, so let's take the path of project end-to-end. So what would you typically do if you're making this project? So if someone says, someone comes to you and says, Sovelo, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is that right? That's right. Okay, so Sovelo, if you're now the FHIR specialist here, you have to set this up. So let's set up a team. Let's decide. Let's make a plan for what that team needs to do. One of the ways you might see this is this. If you want to provide some guidance, so FHIR. So when you do FHIR, you're doing standards, and doing that, it doesn't mean that you have to design the prescription system or the dispensing system. You don't do that. You just discuss and define the way that they talk to each other. If you have any impact on the side systems, that's fine. But normally, when we talk about FHIR, it's just about exchanging information. So if you do that, and if you follow this, like what A says to B, and how can we go through this? So maybe so one path for this would be the following. Yeah, start those with discussions with the people that have the functional knowledge, so the people that are driving this, and say, okay, what do you want? Prescriptions. Okay, do you want prescriptions for dispensing or prescriptions for storing as a repository of a patient's past medications or current medications? Do you want the prescription to be dispensed or not? So you start asking a couple of questions. And the good thing about what we are doing in FHIR is that we are working on the tools, so the implementation guides, for example. We are working on ways that you can actually document these steps in the same implementation guide. So I don't know. First of all, let me ask: are you familiar with the notion of a FHIR implementation guide?
Yeah, I just have an idea, but that needs to be polished.
Okay, let me just show you. Actually, yeah. What I'm showing is an implementation guide. So it's basically a web publication that contains everything that you need to explain to your stakeholders. This is not maybe a good example of an implementation guide. Let me just share US core. I think it's no.
Well, Jose looks for that. We are having a webinar on implementation guides at the end of July. So
yeah,
that will help with that.
So there's several examples of implementation guides. So every implementation guide you see, it has a consistent structure, kind of a consistent look and feel. Lots of text, lots of things. So basically, this is what this document is covering. These are the things that we are discussing. Okay, here, this one has a lot of information. If I go to the index page, I see a description of what it's supposed to be doing. Maybe so. It's just a website that contains the things that we need to publish. And when you do FHIR, you provide not only the narrative text, but also the technical artifacts. We discussed this briefly in the profiling session, and we'll see more on this as we go to the implementation guide session. But FHIR is really strongly supported by computable artifacts. So if you say this is what the prescription should do, you don't say it in text. You say it in a language that computers can understand, that computers can validate. So that if you make one example, then the example is validated when you publish it. So the implementation guide publishes all these sorts of artifacts, we call them, and they can be code systems, they can be value sets. I will show them. They can be instances of something, and they're all FHIR resources. So this is all FHIR resources that we publish. Seydou, were you saying something? Okay, maybe not. If you do, speak up, please. Yeah, so this is just what I'm just showing is the standard implementation guide format that we have. So you see the resources, the FHIR resources, they are expressed in XML or JSON. Turtle is another format, but this is what we produce. So when we are profiling FHIR, our goal is to get to the technical specifications of something like a prescription. This is what it would look like. To get there, and this is where we started. So if you have the first discussions like, what is the prescription about? Is it for information or is it really for dispensing? Then you can say, well, I want to document my use cases. And then you create, that's what we will cover next, not in the next session, but in the other one afterwards. I think it's end of July, we'll look at implementation guide. So this is the outcome. So we can do narrative, we can do lots of text, we can do some introduction pages like this is our prescription specification. If you want to know more about FHIR, please read this before and after. If you see how we are going to use this, etc. So you can write all this text here in preparation. You can do things like the use cases. So you can show what use cases you are covering. And if you do that, you're just adding to your pool of knowledge, to the things that you want to document. So as you start with a project, capture the use cases or document the use cases and try really to document it in some way that people can see it. For me, the best way is just to put it into the implementation guide itself, because then I'm always looking at the same site. And when I deliver a project, I deliver the project, the use cases that were the assumption for this project. I deliver those things as a single box. Next, we can talk about services or transactions. This is a bit more on the enterprise architecture that I was mentioning, but maybe we skip that. The thing that I mentioned, like I was going to say a trick, is what we have logical models in Belgium. They call it the care sets. It's really your abstract data models. So one thing that helps is if you want to discuss with physicians, if you want to discuss with managers, if you want to discuss with non-technical people, you will say, does the patient have one name or several names? Does the patient have an ID or several IDs? Is the passport ID replacing the national ID, or do we want to support them both? And the medication, does it have a code, or does it have several codes depending on the type, if it's just the brand name or the substance? As you answer these questions, as you start defining your data, one of the things that for me it helps is to keep note of that. And you can do that in Notepad, just typing some lines like these are the data elements, or you can do it in logical models, so FHIR logical models. Let me just share one example here, if I may. I just had one, I just lost this. I'm going to things that I know well, so it's just examples. Nothing really. Nothing is really. This is the best way to do it. It's just examples. So if you want to say this, the patient has an addiction, patient has a problem. Okay, maybe what you document is the data structure, and this is the data structure. It just looks like this. We don't want to go into the details, but you can say, okay, we have agreed that the addiction has status, has an identifier, has the patient, has the quantity, like how many cigarettes per day, has the treatment, whether the person is being treated or not, and what treatment is ongoing. This is what you can somewhat discuss with nurses, with doctors, with managers and pharmacists and people in healthcare. It looks a bit still kind of technical-ish, but it's not the technical implementation of this. Then you as a FHIR profiler or as a FHIR implementer, then you say, these are the functional things. These are the use cases that we are going to cover. This is the data that we have agreed that we need. Then you can go into the technical implementation and also to the vocabulary. You can say, what are the codes? Which codes do we use? Do we use Nomad codes? Do we use line codes? Or do we use our own codes? And every time that you do this, so from this moment on, from the moment that you have the use cases, everything that you do, you can say, oh, I'm going to do this, and this is going to be a FHIR resource. For example, if you need a value set, if you need to say that the posology has a code, then you need the value sets for that. You need to see what are the possible options there, what are the possible codes, and that is done in FHIR. So you can say, I'm going to create a FHIR value set for the posology codes. And that becomes one task. So you start looking at this as tasks to implement the requirements that you just got. If you want to define the content of the prescription, then it's a profile. That's the profiling that we did. It's a structured definition that defines the data. And if you want to do that, there is I can go a bit in depth on that one just to recap what we did for profiling. But these are the artifacts. So you start creating FHIR objects, so FHIR artifacts, FHIR resources that contain the technical implementation to your specification. So you start with functional requirements. We need to send a transaction, prescription. That's it. Then you develop those a bit more to the level that you have an agreement and say, okay, guys, we are going to implement this on FHIR, not more than this, not less than this. This is our scope. And then you go into a bit into the profiling, and then after you do that, you create some test data, some test scripts if you want. You create the capability statements. That's something else. So you create some things that might be useful for the implementers to adopt. So if you create test data, it's much easier for everyone to test using the right test data, so that everyone can see how it works. Normally, the test data, it's actually about the use cases. So that if in the beginning you say, please give me an example of a use case. Well, the use case is I want to have tablets of acetaminophen or amoxicillin. Then you might take that as a test data to say, this test confirms that we have met your use case. So this is pretty much an overview of the cycle. I can go into the profiling details a bit if you want, or anyone have any preferences on where to go next, or specific questions or specific things that someone else wants to talk about?
Yeah, thanks, Jose. I think it now starts to make sense, saying after the discussion with the stakeholders, then you start like writing down what are the resources, what are the value sets, and you define those in FHIR standard, yeah?
Yeah.
So the question would be, after you define those, then what comes next? Is it going to be writing codes to read these artifacts, or to read these resources and value sets in FHIR? And is it, yeah, I think that is where I get lost.
Okay, that's good. So that's already a bit more advanced. So that's good. So let's go there. Do you mind if I continue with my boring prescription example?
Yeah, please.
So if you have that, if someone says this is what we have, first of all, just one remark: it never happens in one go, in one step. The moment that you think you have the scope defined, you start working, and the next day they say, "Oh, wait, we forgot one use case." Or most likely when you have some things. So, but that's okay, because FHIR is very, very well prepared for this to be an iterative process. In fact, the things that you see here, all the implementation guides, everything that I showed, they are all the continuous build, which means that it really supports the process of, okay, if you have a new use case, don't worry, let me just, where is it? I forgot I don't know where I left my use case. Yeah, if you have a new use case, oh, don't worry. Then in the next time we publish something, which, there is a development version for a few sprints, then you make the use case, and after they validate the use case, then you implement it, or as you can do the same thing at the same time, or both things at the same time. But it will always be an iterative process. I sometimes say that I think that the well, waterfall and agile is the same thing. It's just the agile is maybe 2-week sprints, waterfall is 3-year sprints. But that's still it still goes into iteration mode, because nothing is perfect the first time. But if you take that cycle of, okay, this is what we do, then addressing your question, what we end up with is a couple of FHIR resources. Let me see if I can think of one that I would share now. Let me think of if I have an easy one. Oh, I actually have an easy one. I made a demo a few days ago. This and this is the. I think this was the. Okay. So just for fun, I made an implementation guide. It's really simple to do these things. The tools they allow you. So the tools really make you focus on the things that you need to focus. So I just made this this implementation guide. It just has one thing, which is just a profile. So it was supposed to have a logical model as well, but for some publication issues, that the tool that I was using was in beta, so I could not publish this. Whatever. It was just a technical complication. So this was for medication schedule. You know, the example that I used was, suppose that you have your mobile application and you want, it's not a prescription, but it's like you want the hospital to send to the nurses or to the patient, like, hey, dear patient, this is your scheduled medication for today or for this week. It's not one prescription. Let's say the hospital says, instead of telling you that you have to take this 3 times a day, no, we will create one appointment in your calendar for each time that you have to wake up or that you have to take your medication. And they will send, you know, instead, so if the medication is 3 times a day, they will send 3 messages or 3 objects to the cell phone. This was just the example to start it. It could be something else. But here, the scope was, this is what was my way of defining the scope. So the scope is someone tells someone else, here is the medication that you are expected to take. It's not an overall view of 3 times per day. It's just take this at 8 o'clock, take this at 4 o'clock, and take this at midnight. If you have that scope, then you say, let me just now do a bit of exercising on profiling. So what happens there is that we have the logical model, and I don't have the logical model here, but the logical model was saying basically that I want to have the patient, I want to have the medication, and I want to have the schedule. Roughly, this was it. And the schedule was not text, it was time of day, because by hypothesis, we wanted this to be structured in a way that a calendar application could read it. So one of the requirements was it has to be structured information for the schedule. It's just for one patient. It's not for sending out to a nurse about everyone, or for a patient you just send data for that patient. Maybe it's just for one day, but you can set that up. So after we define the scope, we have some data elements. And then what we do is to, and this is the whole thing that we have to do when we are profiling FHIR. We say, and that comes a bit with some, I don't know if I should say proficiency or experience, but you get used to this. And if you don't get used to this, you always have the chat.fhir.org. And then you send a message, you say, hey, what resource should I use for this purpose? For the individual schedules of medication for one patient, for each schedule administration, not for the administration itself, but for the schedule administration. Well, if you go to FHIR, oh, sorry, this is now covering my thing, so I'm just going to open it here. If you go to FHIR, and that's always where you start, you go to FHIR and say, where is my medications thing? Okay, if I look at my medications, I have my administration. Okay, this could be it. I'll just open the other one just in case. The administration, and then I read this and say, describes the event of a patient consuming or being administered medication. Okay, this sounds that it could work. So, and then we say this is the all medications and vaccines, so it's good. I just want the medication. It will be used within care settings. Okay. Okay, so that's good. And then I see, well, should I use this resource or any of the other resources? So in FHIR, the resources have this notion that you look at this and say, maybe this is not the resource that you're looking for. And it really helps when you're looking at boundaries and relationships. You say, well, the medication request is an order for supply and giving the medication. I don't think that's it. Medication dispense, no, I'm not dispensing. I'm just talking about medication administration. So again, medication usage, what is this? Well, it's a record of a medication being taken by a patient where the record is a result of a report from the patient. No, I don't think that's it. So I'm just going to shortcut here. It's not it. So medication administration, okay. Non-vaccine medications. Okay, I'm actually just seeing a typo there. I'm actually just, oh, and this will happen. Feel free to say that, hey guys, I'm confused in chat.fhir.org. I'm confused. This is one thing, and this seems to be the other way around. So maybe there's a typo there. This is a typo. I was not expecting this, but this happens because I'm looking at the current build version of FHIR, which is says to be, which is supposed to be, and it says here, it will be incorrect or inconsistent at times. So actually, maybe the first thing, and I should have done this, I was just a bit lazy. When you go to FHIR, you can do build.fhir.org, or as I said in my sessions, hl7.org/FHIR. When you do that, you always go to the latest version, to the official version of FHIR. So this is the current published version, and then you can expect a bit more of consistency. I hope I'm not mistaken by doing this, but yeah. So this is, oh, sorry, my browser is not, yeah, okay. So I was looking at this resource. Okay, this looks like the medication resource that I want. Now, if I look at this at the content, well, I have the patient, I have the medication, so the patient is the subject, I have the medication. I pretty much have all I need, and I have the date time. Wow, this is really great. The one thing that reading carefully, and mostly by asking others, and this is very important, this is why it's very important to talk to the rest of the community, is that this is not the right resource for this, for what I mentioned. If I'm saying this is the planned or the scheduled medication, then it's not an actual medication intake. The medication administration is for the actual administration intake. So it's not a planned event, it's the event. And there's a separation there in FHIR, so it's good to know these things. When you do this, say, well, medication administration looks like this, but it's the wrong thing. It's the actual event. So if this is the event, what we're saying is that we want the request for this. Then we look at the medication request, and then we go through the reasoning, and then we would see that, well, there is a thing here called intent that says, let me see what's intent about. And you click on it and you say, what I'm talking about is not a proposal for medication. It's not really a plan. Well, it could be a plan or an order. It is an order, but what kind of order? I have this thing here, instance order. Well, it's an instance of a particular order, for example, medication administration record. Okay, the wording here could be a bit more clear, but this is the one that has been agreed in the community. So if you go to chat.fhir.org, if you ask this question, the consensus will be clear after a very short time that for this you use the medication request, because we're saying please take one medication at that time, and then you're no longer in the administration. We don't call it a planned administration, you call an order for an administration, and then you go back to this, and then you say, well, do I need a status? Well, I need a status because status is mandatory. So okay, so we have to define what's my status. I don't need a status reason, so let me just clear that up. And your profiling work will always be this. Say, okay, do I need a status reason? No. Well, here it's optional. Maybe I leave it optional because someone of my implementers might still want to say a reason, but maybe I say this is not supported, and then we just remove it. When you do profiling, you're taking this and doing the, where is it? The thing that I wanted to show, I think it's here. When you create a profile, you create a special version of what you want to transmit. And then in this case, it was, well, I want the intent, because the intent has to be an instance order. So this is a fixed value. It's no longer any of these values. It's just this value. So I have that as a fixed value element. Then I have the medication, which can be a codable concept or reference. That's just the data types. And if I say this is because of a prescription, then I have the link to the prescription. Then I have my notes and my dosage instructions, which contains all the time for administration, etc., etc. Actually, I forgot here to put the patient, the subject. So when you do profiling, you're saying, well, this field is going to be forbidden, this field is going to be mandatory, and this field is going to have a fixed value. You do a few more things on that. We discussed that in the profiling session, and we'll see this more in practice. But this is pretty much what you do. When you come out of this, you have one data structure that is derived from the original data structure. So this medication request is derived from the original FHIR medication request. So I could call this medication schedule. And this is derived from the medication request. And this medication schedule is just a subset, or actually just a special version of the medication request. It just has, instead of having this as optional or as any value, it's a fixed value. Maybe these ones would be mandatory. Maybe the patient would be mandatory. I think it is already. This is what you do in profiling. And after you do that, you create, so the way to do it, we will see it in the implementation guide. There are tools that allow you to create this kind of content. And then you say, hey guys, from what we agreed, the patient is mandatory, yes or no? Yes. And then you say, okay, patient is mandatory. There's a way to say this. Once you do that, when you publish this, it will show like this. And this is pretty much the most common end of the story. This is where people say, okay, we've done the profiling. Now it's up for implementers. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Then the people on the servers, they kick in. I'm just going to introduce that for people to ask further questions here. But then the server guys, they kick in by saying, okay, if you have this is a, as I said, everything is computable in FHIR. So this is a JSON object. This is a structure definition. So actually what happens is that I can go to my server. Let's see. Org. I can go to this. This is one example server. This is an open source server. That's one that's very commonly used. And then I see, okay, I have this in this thing. I have my structure definitions, and I have and everything that I'm doing now is just using this front end, interacting with the FHIR in the FHIR language with the server. So that there is a server that has FHIR resources. I'm going to search for which resources the server has, and I'm going to search for which resources of the type structure definition. So this is just the front end. I'm just going to open the direct REST call. You see, you just say, I want to have the structure definitions like this. That's it. But I wanted to have it in XML format. Let me see if this works. Yeah, it works. It downloads things. So the servers have that capability. The servers are the ones that talk that language. So to the servers, you don't have to say how they behave. You just have to say which dialect of FHIR should they support, which subset of FHIR should they support. That's pretty much what we are doing when we are profiling, is to say this system talks FHIR, but it talks a specific dialect, a specific language, sub-language of FHIR. So in this case, if I say that I have a structure definition, if I made my structure definition that I had before, I have, for example, here's the structure definition. This is a structure definition for something, I don't know what, it's an extension. Well, it's not a profile. Let me just see if I can find another one. This one looks like a profile. Oh, it's still an extension. Oh, you'll have many of those. So forgive me if I don't find. Yeah, this should be one. Yeah. So this is next. This is a FHIR resource or a FHIR. This is an extension still. Yeah, so this is just an example. So when you define the FHIR profiles, I'm just trying to see if I can find something that is more clearly a profile, but I can. Yeah, it's too many. No, I will not be able to find it like this. I could do a special search here to look for profiles on the medication resource or on the medication request. Let me see if I can. Yeah, but what you have is you have JSON or XML. You have those artifacts. If you have those, actually, maybe this one is a profile. Let me see. Yep, this one looks like a profile. Sorry. Just let me click here. This is a profile on medication request even. So let me just go up until I find the beginning of this. And there it is. So if I open this, this is the structure definition. So this is a profile like we have on the on this thing. This is the that's the URL that I clicked, and that same thing is stored in this server as this JSON. So the other thing was just a visualization. This is what the server knows. And once the server knows, you can do things like, okay, show me all the requests of this type. So it's not all the medication requests, including prescriptions, but no, just show me all the schedules. Or when you post something to the server, you can say to the server, please accept only things that have a mandatory patient, or please accept things that are according to this. Or basically, you can make your server behave in any way that is FHIR compatible that you want. And the way to do this is by providing these resources. Sorry if I'm oversimplifying things, but this is the path. So you make those artifacts, those technical artifacts, and you push them onto a server, or you use them as examples when you're testing this, or you are putting this on a testing tool, or you're pushing them onto your application as examples, as I said, as a way to say this is the profile is the subset of the language, and the rest, the behavior of the systems, that is FHIR standard. So this server is FHIR compliant, so it accepts medication requests, it accepts patients, etc. That's how pretty much the ecosystem starts plugging together. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so once you have the profile or the structure definition and you push it to this server, then this is the FHIR server. So the implementers are going to be pulling everything from this server.
Not this, but any FHIR server. So there is lots
any
of FHIR
server. Okay.
But yeah, so the FHIR server contains, so when we talk about the FHIR server, we're talking about a server that implements their things according to the FHIR specification. So this is one reference implementation of FHIR. It's open source, and so this one is deployed, but you can deploy your own. So it's also possible to deploy your own server, which is normally what you do if you have your own project. And once you do that, go on, sorry.
Yeah, and when you have the FHIR server, it means the FHIR server manages all the storage for whatever you will be pushing.
If you want to, you can also say that the FHIR server is just acting as a facade as an entry point to the actual data. Because normally, if you are talking about existing data, if you have an existing system, maybe you don't want to restart creating parallel data. Maybe you just want to have that system communicating in a FHIR language, and in that case, you just use the parts of this platform or others. You just use this. We call it the FHIR facade. So you just have the same old building there, the same old data, but you just find a way to map this to FHIR resources. And then what you have to do is, for example, if in the medication example, if the patient is in the patient's table and not in the subject table, and if where is it? There's a subject here somewhere. The subject is here. If the medication is stored in the products table, not on the medication table, well, as long as you can map and as you can build these objects to exchange, and as long as you can, of course, implement the syntax, so the servers really help you with that layer, with the FHIR compatibility layer, and saying how can you search, what can you search on, etc. So you don't have to define your own API; it's already defined. What you have to do is to see which dialect, which sub language of FHIR is it going to talk in.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. What about the others? Does this ring any familiar topics, experience, pain, future problems? Okay, no one is saying anything. I assume that they are digesting it. So Seydou, I don't know if you're with us. I don't know if you joined us for the introductions. We are just discussing openly any questions, any topics. If you have any questions, it would be good to feel free to share them. Yeah, and so Velo, how does this relate to whatever your next steps will be?
Well, so I'm currently not like actively involved in development, but I think I'll find some dummy project and try implement this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing that I always repeat is it's very important to set up an account on chat.fhir.org. It's an open community. If you haven't done yet, that's where most of us hang out, us as in the people that care about this. And it's really easy. It's really an open community. If you have any kind of questions, complicated questions, simple questions, that's no problem. There's always discussion for that, open discussions for that. And yeah, so what matters for me, I think what matters the most is the fact that we can start. So all of this is open information. All of this is available. By seeing something, I think for me it works really well. If I see something done, then I can extrapolate to other projects. Some people work differently, but during that extrapolation, I always have questions. I always have challenges, and that's where the chat.fhir.org has really helped. And yeah, and there's going to be more and more fun stuff to do. For example, the thing with deploying a server, we are now playing with deploying a server, so that instead of having to implement everything on your side or even configuring it, we are thinking of automatic configuration of servers. So there's always some cool stuff to do to make the lives of implementers easy. So it's really important that you express, yeah, these questions, like, or if you say, well, I started implementing this, but now I have a problem. How do those two servers talk to each other? Okay, let's have a discussion on that. Those are things that we really welcome as input for our discussions.
Cool. Thanks for.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Yep.
Is there anything else that we should cover? I cannot think of anything else that would take us a short amount of time. Is there any pending questions? Any ideas for future discussions? What would you like to see next? Anything? No? Okay. So Vrunda, I don't know if you have any ideas for these next few minutes, or if we start wrapping up.
I think we should wrap up a few minutes early. Thank you for those of us that joined, and we look forward to seeing you at the June 30th terminology webinar. If you haven't registered, I'll drop the link in here.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Jose, how do you say your first name? Jose or Jose?
Jose. It's Portuguese, so
Jose.
It's with a J.
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing you, looking forward to seeing you in chat.fhir.org.
Sure.
Deal?
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.